Welcome back, students. This is Omkar sir from biology lecture. In our last video, we had studied what are the types of pollinating agents. In our this video, we would be starting with the outbreeding devices. We have already seen the basic difference between the self and the cross pollination. We all know that self pollination is very important for selfness, but cross pollination is a very important fact that would help in further creating variation, and variation would eventually lead to evolution. So the nature also helps in creating variation. That's why there are some devices that we call it as outbreeding devices. So we'll look at what exactly are outbreeding devices. The devices which promote the cross pollination and prevent the self pollination are called as or are known as outbreeding devices. ऐसे devices जो promote करते, that helps them to carry out cross pollination and prevent self pollination, such type of devices are called as outbreeding devices. Now we have few important reasons for promoting the cross pollination and preventing the self pollination. The reason is that cross pollination or outbreeding helps in creating genetic diversity, and as we all know, more the diversity, it would eventually lead to evolution, and all the life on earth exists to evolve, to adapt to the changing environment and to survive. So that's why outbreeding is very essential in case of creating genetic diversity, and that which leads to evolution. What happens when there is a continuous inbreeding? Continuous self-pollination definitely would lead to creating a very genetically identical progenies. However, continuous self-breeding or self-pollination would eventually create a very important problem, that is inbreeding depression, in which the progeny becomes so weak and so susceptible to various genetic disorders that one small disease could not only destroy a single plant because of their unique similar genetic material, that could literally destroy the entire field. So that is why inbreeding depression is a very important problem in case of continuous self-pollination. So we all know now why nature itself favors outbreeding as compared to inbreeding. There are some important outbreeding devices that we are supposed to study in case of this particular video. We have 6 important outbreeding devices, starting from unisexuality, then we have dichogamy, then we have prepotency, heterostyle, hercogamy, and self-sterility. So we'll start understanding about them one by one. First we'll start with unisexuality. As the name says, uni in the sense one. So we have first type of unisexuality, that is monoecious. Monoecious मतलब क्या होता है? A same plant having different male and female flowers. What do you mean by this statement? A single plant has two different types of flower. One flower with only male reproductive whorl, that is only androecium, but no gynoecium, and second flower that is with female reproductive whorl, that is only gynoecium. So that means the one flower with only androecium is called as male flower, and the other flower with only gynoecium is called as female flower. That means the flowers are different but present on the same plant. Such type of plants are called as monoecious plant. Since the plants are having two different flowers, that is unisexual flowers on the same plant, there would be a less chance of self-pollination taking place between these two flowers. Second type of unisexuality is dioecious plant. Dioecious plant के बारे में हम लोगों ने already पढ़ा है. A single plant bearing either a male flower or a female flower. मतलब क्या? There are two different plants of the same species. One plant would have only male flowers, that means only flowers with male reproductive whorl, and the other plant would have female flowers, that means the only flowers they have would contain female flowers, that means the flower contains only female reproductive whorl, that is only gynoecium is present in this particular flowers. We can see here in case of hermaphrodite flowers in the sense a flower having both androecium and gynoecium present in the single flower are called as hermaphrodite or bisexual flower. Monoecious plant में देखो, we can see here a single plant is present, in which we can see here only anthers are present, that is the male flower. Okay, and only gynoecium is present, that is the female flower, but both the flowers are present on the same plant. That's why we call it as monoecious plant. Second is dioecious plant. Di in the sense two. Okay, we have two different plants. One plant would have only female reproductive whorl and the other plant would have only male reproductive whorl. Such type of plants are called as dioecious plant. So this is all about we have in case of unisexuality. Second is dichogamy. Now what is dichogamy? It is a condition in which the anther and stigma they mature at different type in a bisexual flower. We all know that a bisexual flower is a flower which has both the reproductive whorl, the male as well as the female. The problem with that is since the bisexual flower have both the reproductive whorls present in the same flower, there is a high chance of self-pollination. So how do the nature tackle this problem? The nature has designed a simple mechanism. This mechanism involves the maturation of the anther and the stigma, or I would say the male and the female reproductive whorl mature at different time, and because of that they won't self-pollinate in case of such bisexual flowers. So we have protandry and protogamy as a two type of dichogamy. Protandry, the word protandry means andry. Andry मतलब होता है androecium. In this particular type of mechanism, the androecium matures earlier than gynoecium. That means the pollen grains would be matured before even the stigma gets receptive. So this is how the self-pollination would be prevented in case of protandry. Other way around, protogamy, as the suffix says gny, in this particular mechanism, the gynoecium matures earlier than the androecium. So stigma becomes receptive far before the anther even starts releasing the pollen grain. This is how the dichogamy helps in preventing self-pollination even in case of a bisexual flower. So you can see here in case of dichogamy, we have protandry. The anther is releasing the pollen grain, but the stigma is not receptive. When the stigma becomes receptive, the pollen grains have been emptied from the anther lobe. In protogamy, the gynoecium becomes mature, but still the pollen grains have not been formed. But as the time proceeds, the gynoecium, the stigma has lost its receptiveness, has lost its maturity, but the pollen grains have now been released. So this is how the self-pollination is prevented in case of a bisexual flower by a mechanism of dichogamy. Third is prepotency. What is prepotency? Okay, pollen grains of other plants germinate rapidly over the stigma than the pollen grains of the same flower. You can see here what is exactly the situation. ये है S1 और S2, S3 and S4. What is exactly happening here is S1 and S2 are the same type of stigma and S1 and S2 are the same type of pollen grain. तो अगर pollen grain S2 है और S1 है तो इधर देखो ये रैपिडली डेवलप नहीं हो रहा है, बट जो दूसरे का pollen grain है S3 is not the pollen grain of the same flower, that is the pollen grain of the different flower, that would start germinating rapidly. So you can see here S3 and S4 are germinating rapidly. S3 here is germinating rapidly as compared to S1, where S1 and S2 are not germinating at all, but they would germinate very slowly. S1 and S2 belongs to the same flower, that's why their germination is very slow. S3 and S4 are pollen grains of different flower, that's why they are germinating rapidly. So this type of mechanism is known as prepotency. We'll move to the next part, that is the fourth type, that is heterostyle. As the name says hetero means difference, styler in the sense the length of the style. So in some plant there are two or three different types of flower in which the anther and stigma are placed at different levels. Different levels in the sense the position of the anther and stigma are placed at different levels. So what we call it as heterostyle or heteroanthian. Heterostyle in the sense the change in the length of the style, and heteroanthy in the sense change in the length of the anther. So you can see here the length of the style is larger than that of the anther. That's why self-pollination cannot take place. In case of this particular flower, the length of the filament is or the anther is large as compared to the short styled. This would prevent the self-pollination again. In case of heteromorphic flowers, heteromorphic in the sense the flowers which have different lengths of style and filament, the pollen grains are produced from anther and pollinated on stigmas which are produced at the same level. So understand, the pollination would occur between this anther to this style because they are at the same level, and this anther to this stigma, which are present at the same level. This is what the phenomena of heterostyle helps in preventing self-pollination and promoting cross-pollination. The fifth type is hercogamy. What is hercogamy? In some plants, there is a natural physical barrier present between the two sex organs. Even if the flower is bisexual, there is a physical barrier which is present between the androecium and the gynoecium that would avoid the contact of pollen grain with the stigma of the same flower. Example is Calotropis, where pentagular stigma is positioned above the levels of the anthers. So you can see here, this is what the stigma is, that is the pentagular stigma, which is located just above the anthers. So anthers are located below, there's a pentagular structure and the stigma is having a depression here. So the positioning and the physical barrier makes it difficult for the self-pollination to take place in case of a bisexual flower. So such type of phenomena is called as hercogamy. Let's see the last type of outbreeding device, that is self-incompatibility. As the name says, self-incompatibility, also known as self-sterility. This is a genetic mechanism due to which the germination of pollen grain on stigma of the same flower is inhibited. That means the pollen grain of the same flower won't be germinated on the stigma of the same flower. So what would happen? Let's take an example. S1 and S2 and S1 and S2. So these are the pollen grains of the same flower and this is also the stigma of the same flower. Where S3 is the pollen grain of different flower. So you can see here the pollen tube which is formed of S3 is rapidly being produced as compared to that of S1 and S2. In the second plant also we can see the same result. In case of second flower, S1 and S2, that is having the self incompatibility, both the pollen grains are not germinated at all. So this is in case of self incompatibility, where the self pollen grains are not germinated on the self stigma and hence self pollination is prevented and cross pollination is promoted. This is an overview of an outbreeding devices. You could simply pause the video and have a look at it. This entire chart would explain us an overview of the outbreeding devices. In our next video, we'll be starting with pollen pistil interaction and double fertilization. I hope you liked the video and understood the concept. If you have any suggestion or ask any sort of doubts, you could do it by simply commenting below. I'll be there to solve your doubts for sure. And please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe my channel for more amazing videos. Thank you. See you in your next video.